to Pi-hole and that part of the security. We're going to deal with the basic firewall configuration, focusing on Unify and touching base on Microtech. However, there is other firewalls out there, and I am working on supporting Untangle, which is one of my favorites. However, in the light and interest of this video, I'm going to touch base on Microtech and Unify. In my first video, I alluded to the fact that Unify's firewall abilities is not all that great in terms of how robust it is, so it becomes necessary to set up a firewall between your cable modem, your ISP, and your internal network, which is how this works. Because I have my cable modem, then from my cable modem I have a network cable going into a fiber converter, and then from the converter I have a fiber optic cable going into the Microtech SFP port. I know fiber is not necessary, but I'm doing it, from a support standpoint. So your Microtech firewall will already have a certain set of rules, attached to it, which you will definitely have to go in and change, certain specifics on, what ports you want, things like that. However, let me, preface this to say that if you are not running servers or anything, of that nature, then do not open up your firewall, because that becomes a security issue that you have to watch out for. So I'm going to get my Microtech interface brought up, and you will have a interface that looks like this. You have the benefit to Microtech. You do have the option for telnet. You have another option which is Winbox, which I've used, and it's not too shabby. So what you will want to do after you get to your web interface, you type in your credentials, you hit the login button. The first thing that comes up is a list of all your interfaces and the data that's going across your interfaces, which if you look at the bottom for mine, you're going to see the SFP port, which is showing data going in and out. But that's kind of irrelevant to this particular video. To access the firewall on Microtech, you will want to go down to your on your left hand side, click on IP, and then you go down to where it says firewall. Now there are certain default settings that have already been set up. However, you can feel free to disable all of these and have nothing open, or you can set up specific situations for yours, which is what I have done. You will notice that I have different ports open because I'm running things like VPN connections, that sort of thing, which is another video for further down the road. And then I have the management for the Winbox, which is that one. And then I have the some of these ports I've got it telling to drop, and then now that's just for security standpoint. One thing I will tell you though is that you will want to set up at least one firewall rule to block out the ICMP. The ICMP is something that looks like this. Let me get to my other screen here. You will see. Alright, to get the ICMP, you will want to use your command prompt. And let me drag it over here. Alright, and then you will want to type in ping, and then we'll go to www.foxnews.com. Now, under normal circumstances, you're going to get some information, how many hops, that sort of thing. However, because I have blocked ICMP both in and out, I'm going to get an error that says that the request timed out, that it lost all 4 packets. It sent 4 packets out, tried to send them out, but it received nothing in return, which equals a loss of 100%, which is what I want for this particular setup. Because what'll happen, let's say that you got somebody trying to get into your network, they're going to be pinging all sorts of IP addresses, and then the routers are going to respond, and it's almost like saying, yes, hey, I'm here, can you see me? Whereas if you block out ICMP, the router will essentially ignore any pinging requests that come across. It'll just drop them, or it'll flat out reject them. Now, in terms of the firewall aspect, it is always better to have the router drop it, because it doesn't send any kind of acknowledgement. It just as if it never happened. Whereas if you actually have it reject it, it will send an acknowledgement back saying that it rejected the packet, which is still saying that your router is active and it's out there. So, whereas dropping is probably the best way to do it for that reason. So, most of the time, default configuration will need change. And for the standard home user, my suggestion would be to delete all the default settings, and then because you're essentially going to open up certain things on your firewall, whereas the firewall will and then once you delete all the defaults, go in and add specific ports if that is something you need. Otherwise, it's not necessary because everything's closed off by default. Where the firewall is going to be, need to be configured as if you're running your own web server, your own DNS, your own email server. If you're going to run video cameras, you want on your own NVR, which is a network video recorder, and you want to access it from the outside, you can do it that way. However, it is not recommended. There are other options out there that you can use where you can still access your internal resources. VPN is, an option. There's a program that I use called TeamViewer that works really good. Then there's, Type VNC, which is another remote access thing. I mean, there's a list of options out there. However, from a security standpoint, you should not open up your firewall. Now, I know I'm calling the kettle black here because I've got certain things on here, but again, that should be specific to your situation. So let's say that you have already configured all your settings on your edge router, as we'll call it, even though technically it's not an edge router. That's kind of a Unify thing, but I really don't have another way to describe it. So once you have everything configured, then you will want to go into your Unify system. And then you will want to log into it using your username and password. And then obviously you click network, you go down to settings. Alright, now the nice thing about this older interface that I have is that routing and firewall is right there. So most home users and most business users do not need to add static routes unless you are potentially doing site to site traffic routing. Most of the time you can leave this blank. Firewall, this is pretty as you can see, I have certain things that's opened on my Microtech, but everything here is actually being dropped or blocked for whatever reason. There's only one rule that accepts traffic, and that is allows established related sessions. I believe that's a default, and then another default is drop an invalid state. Those you cannot delete outside of on the Unify system. However, as you can see, I've added some specific rules for IP addresses, things like that. For example, you will see that I have an IP address here. These IP addresses that I'm denying access for have been determined to be launching different types of network attacks. It could be Trojans, port scans, that sort of thing. So that's all that is. It's just simply denying them access to the Unify stuff. And then, as I mentioned in the earlier portion of this video, I mentioned ICMP. I configured a rule on Microtech to drop ICMP, and then I came over to Unify to do the same thing. That's just an added layer, which simply means that Unify will not respond to any pings either. And then I created a group for my NAS, which is network attached storage, which essentially will not allow it to communicate to the internet. No way can it send anything out, and it cannot send anything, and nothing coming in will be routed to the NAS. I do that for security reasons because of the confidential data, things like that. I keep like household affairs, finances, things of that nature on that particular setup, and nobody needs access to it but me, and those are in my household. So with that being said, this is the page that you'll see something similar to this. Obviously, from a default standpoint, you're only going to have 2 rules in there. However, I would set up the specific rules to your situation. So to set up that, you will go and click rule, then you will give the rule a name. I always leave as before the predefined rules, which means before the stuff that's already in there. Then I have it just drop it. I do not do any rejects whatsoever because I mentioned that reason earlier. Protocols, I have it depending on what I'm doing. Most of the time you're going to want TCP and UDP. Those are the 2 protocols used to route traffic, port forwarding, that sort of thing. Or if you have another specific protocol that you want to block or accept, you can click on the protocol name, and then you can come down here and click until you find the protocol you want, and then once you find it, you click on it, and then after you do that, after you set this new rule portion up, then you have some advanced options. If you want to enable logging, you can. However, the issue that you're going to run into if you enable logging is that you will run out of space on your Unify machine. So I normally don't recommend enabling logging unless there's a specific rule or protocol that keeps getting hit. Then you could do that to see what's going on. Now you have down here where it says source, you can pick your sources, which you've got network, then you've got IP addresses. However, the thing with the IP address, if you know the attack is coming from a specific IP address, then you can put that in there. But another thing that Unify has going for it is you can actually create an IP4 address group, which I did because my NASs are all static IPs. So I go in, I'll click on that, and then, you know, once we're done with that, I have the option of creating a port group. Here I can add, I'll give it a name, and then let's, obviously it's going to be, port, and then I can add the specific ports I want. I can add as many ports as I want, to this group. All right, once I add the, ports that I want, you come over and you click save. And then once that's done, it'll have, your particular port group here. And then once that is done, you can set up, IP4, groups, for the addresses. So you have specific IP addresses that are causing, certain problems. Then you can add them into it. And then, you create the IP4 address group. Once you've done all that, you click save. Now, once you click save, your new rule is going to pop up in this section, and it should have a check mark by it that says enable. So that is how you create a firewall rule. Now, the other side of this coin is the port forwarding aspect. The port forwarding is where you deal with your servers and things of that sort. In most cases, the home users will not be running any local servers. I have a rack with 3 of them in there that I will run on occasion, depending on what the project is. Otherwise, most of the stuff I run is off-site in the cloud on a VPS, and it just gets ridiculously expensive if you run, more than, 2 servers at once. Now, there's other things you can do for that, that's, dealing with like Dropbox, VPSs, but that's a whole nother series that we may get into. Okay, so if you've added, ports for port forwarding, such as port 80, port 8080, HTTPS, which is 443, DNS, which is port 53, SMTP and POP3. SMTP is port 25, POP3 is 110, and just whatever ports you're adding, they will be routed to that particular IP address, which that IP address should be static, which in this particular case, I assume that you're running your own servers, and then which would have to be static. However, if you're not, then you do not need any port forwarding rules added. Another thing that Unify has in terms of their firewall, which is it's not bad. It's still in the infant stages, if you will, is how you enable GeoIP filtering, which basically means you're going to block traffic from that particular country. So you will, if you want to enable GeoIP filtering, which I recommend doing, by the way, you will want to make sure the enable button is set to on. And then you come down and click the country or territory. And let's see, who do we want to pick on today? Let's see, I think I might have, okay, let's go to Cuba. Alright, so I clicked on Cuba. As you can see, Cuba is already added to the list. Down in where it says action, you will want to, most certainly, and most of the time you will want to add block, and then the traffic direction you want both. That means no traffic can be sent to these particular countries. Now, if you'll notice, a lot of these countries that are on mine have been tied to the Islamic movement, they're terrorists, that sort of thing. So I do my best to try to keep them from getting into my network. Now, I have to say this, that it is not 100% foolproof. None of this is. It is just one of the better ones that I've dealt with, because I went from the standard home user to the, industrial type scenario, which is why I've got Unify and Unify access points and that sort of thing. However, I have to stress that it is not foolproof, and this is not a one size fits all. In addition to the firewalls and the changes that we have made, you will want to add firewall software, which we'll get into that later on. So once you've added all the countries that you've wanted, you hit the apply changes. Up in the right hand corner, you will see that the changes were saved successfully. That is how you handle the firewalls. Now another component of the routing and firewall, the port forwarding, is threat management. Now threat management and Unify has two different ways. You have IDS, which is intrusion detection system, or you have IPS, which is intrusion prevention system. And you will want to use IPS because it is a preventative measure. Now, again, let me say this, and you can even see it on the screen here, that it is in the beta testing, so there's still some issues going on. However, it's fairly simple to set up, and however, again, I have to stress the fact that it's in beta and it may not be 100% one size fits all type thing. However, from what I have experienced with it so far, it doesn't seem like it's too bad. So down here you will have threat management categories. As you can see in my particular scenario, I have turned on certain categories to block these particular threats. For example, peer-to-peer, which is like BitTorrent, or back in the day it was like LimeWire, Kazaa, that sort of, any torrent program, it should block it. However, that's not entirely accurate, and that's where Pi-hole will come into play, which we will discuss in a future video that's coming up later on this week. I do not have email servers, so I got some of that stuff turned on. Then you've got let's see, another one, malware. You definitely want to monitor malware. Mobile malware, which is becoming a thing, is for your cell phones, tablets, mobile devices, so on and so forth. Let's see, another one that you will want to watch out for is the Tor network, which is the dark web where you can buy stolen credit cards and get into some rather disturbing content. The Trojans obviously is something that you should monitor, and then you've got worms. Again, this will help prevent such things from taking over your network. However, this in of itself is not 100%. I cannot stress that enough. So once you have selected everything, then you can go down to threat management allow list. Do not change this. Leave it as it is. All right. Then you got signature suppression, and some of this stuff will be added as time goes on. Then you'll have the option to suppress different things, which again, for the most part, Unify has been pretty good about that. Again, like I said, I cannot stress the fact that it is not 100%. Now, as we mentioned, we have Microtech for this particular environment. Then we have the settings on Microtech. Then we have Unify, which has its own set of settings. And then, in addition to Unify, and this is the other part of it, you will need some type of antivirus software. All right, I have been a fan of Symantec for years. It has been one of my favorites, and And you can see that in my particular setup, I have up to 10 licenses, which I do not anticipate adding any more. But Norton is also an additional piece of software that is a last line of defense. Now, I know there are different schools of thought on Norton or things of that sort. However, it depends on the case by case scenario. But for my network, Norton is the best way to go because I've got Norton on all my mobile devices. I've got Norton on all my desktops and laptops, and its interface is pretty simple, and it automatically updates this, that, and the other. Now, even with the software that I have set up on my network, on top of the firewall from Microtech, on top of the firewall from Unify, it is still not 100%. I am still at risk for an attack coming from the outside because we're all connected on the internet in one way or the other. So there is some risk, but there are certain things that you can do to mitigate the risk factor. So as I've mentioned before, I've touched base on Microtech, I've touched base on Unify, I've touched base on Norton 360. My recommendation at the bare minimum is going and getting a subscription for Norton 360. I have nothing but good comments to say about that. I've been using it for quite a while. And then also, for those that are wondering if I get any kind of endorsement or any kind of kickback from any of these vendors, I get absolutely nothing. I get zero compensation. This is all based on my personal experience with the software, the hardware, things that I've been using for over a year now. So these are just my opinions, my views. And then so if any of you guys have any questions about any of the content in this video or any other video, feel free to leave a comment and I will respond directly back. Once I get the website set up, you'll have an option there to send me an email directly, and then again I will respond. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for any future videos, feel free to leave a comment below, or leave a comment to the side, or wherever the little box is at. And then if you haven't done so already, make sure you like and subscribe to the video, and then click on the little bell if you're seeing this on YouTube so you're notified of when future videos are being posted. In regards to future videos, most of these are pre-recorded and they are set to broadcast usually at night right around 11:30, just because there's very little activity on my network since it's all coming from here. So in the meantime, I will be having a live video session coming up, and I'm not sure when that's going to be. It will depend on how things are playing out, which I should know about how things are going to go tomorrow night, and then I'll have the info for the live stuff in a video or posted somewhere. In the meantime, like I said, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out and leave a comment, and then carry on